The ocean does not care what year it is. Commander Elena Vasquez had known that since she was 9 years old, standing on the pier in Cartagena, watching her father's fishing boat disappear into a squall that took him and 4 other men and never gave them back. The sea ate time whole. It ate names and faces and the specific weight of a man's hand on your shoulder. You could mark the calendar you wanted. The sea didn't read calendars. She thought about that now, standing at the con of the Resolute, watching the instruments do things instruments were not supposed to do. Shh. Nav, give me that reading again. Lieutenant O.C. Mensah looked up from his console with an expression she had learned to dread. The one where he was absolutely certain of the data and absolutely unwilling to say it out loud. Same as before, Commander. Gravitational variance 0.73. Temporal displacement field, he stopped. Finish it. Instruments say we're reading a closed loop, ma'am. The space-time around the hull has folded back on itself. He paused. Sir, that's not possible. I can see it's not possible, Mensah. I'm looking at the same board you are. She pulled up the composite display on the command screen. Resolute was a deep survey vessel. Not military, technically, though she carried 2 mounts and enough firepower to discourage anyone who thought survey meant defenseless. Her crew of 42 were scientists, engineers, and a handful of Security Corps personnel who spent most of their time playing cards and pretending they weren't bored. They were 4 days into a mapping run through the Heron Deep, which was a sector of open ocean that the Galactic Survey Authority had flagged as anomalous since first contact. Anomalous. That was the word they used when they didn't want to say wrong. The Heron Deep was wrong. The way a room is wrong when you come home and something is missing, but you can't name it yet. Wrong the way silence sounds wrong when you expect an answer. Every probe GSA had dropped into it came back with corrupted telemetry. Every long-range scan produced measurements that conflicted with themselves. 3 Cathali research vessels had passed through this region in the past decade, and all 3 had filed reports describing minor equipment malfunctions and crew disorientation. Nothing more. The Cathali were meticulous record keepers. If they said minor, they meant minor. Elena had read those reports twice on the transit out here. She had also read the classified annex that most survey commanders were never cleared for, the one that noted all 3 Cathali vessels had filed their reports between 14 and 19 months after their scheduled return windows. The Cathali's official explanation was administrative delay. GSA's classified assessment was 16 words long. Recommend further investigation. Do not recommend manned missions until anomaly is better characterized. Elena had agreed to this posting anyway. She's not sure that said good things about her judgment. Commander. Chief Engineer Priadakari's voice came from the engine room feed, calm and precise the way it always was, which meant things were bad. We have a problem. Scale of 1 to 10, a beat. I'm going to say 8. The drive fields are oscillating in sync with whatever's outside the hull. We're not pushing through the water anymore, Commander. I think the water is pushing us. Toward? The center of the variance. Where else? Elena looked at her crew. 20 people on the bridge, give or take. All of them watching her with that particular brand of professional composure that humans default to when they are frightened and don't want to show it. She had recruited most of them herself. Mensah, who had turned down a teaching position at Io University to work surveys because he said he needed to see things for himself before he believed them. Dr. Noor Asif at the science station, who had published 4 papers on spatial anomaly physics and was now sitting with her fingers an inch above her console like she was afraid touching it might change something. Petty Officer First Class Yusuf Okafor at the weapons board, who was playing absolutely no cards at all. All stop, Elena said. Emergency ballast. Let's see if we can back off the variance gradient. The Resolute groaned. Not a mechanical sound, or not only mechanical, more like the sound a house makes in a bad storm, when the frame takes the wind personally. Elena gripped the back of the command chair and watched the depth gauge drop and rise and drop again without logic. Watched the forward cameras show water that was lit from below by something that had no business being there. Something blue-white and very old, the color of light that had been compressed until it forgot what frequency it started as. Drive fields won't respond, Dakarai said. We are being pulled, Commander. I want to be very clear about that so it is in the record. Noted Mensa, seal all compartments. Asef, I need you recording everything. Every instrument on the boat, continuous capture. If we come out the other side of this, I want data. If, Mensa said quietly. When, Elena said. Not because she believed it. Exactly. Because someone had to say it. And she was the one who got paid to say it. The light hit the hull and the world went away. She was on the floor of the bridge when the world came back. Was her first data point. She was on the floor, which meant she had been somewhere else. Which meant time had passed. Which meant they were still alive. She ran through that logic in about half a second and was on her feet before anyone else moved. The instruments were running. That was the second data point. Patchy, a third of the boards dark, but running. She pulled up external cameras and got an image that took her 4 long seconds to parse. Ocean, sky, coastline close, maybe 8 kilometers. Familiar curve of a continental shelf. The color of the water different from the Haren deep, greener, shallower. And, above the coastline, where there should have been nothing but sky, there were structures. Towers, or what remained of towers. Jagged black shapes against a sky that was the wrong color. Too orange at the horizon, too flat at the zenith, like the atmosphere had been stressed somehow and never fully recovered. Port, Elena said. The reports came in pieces, no casualties. Teen minor injuries from the impact. Dakarai counting a broken collarbone among them, her own. Teen of 42, instrument boards operational. No drive response. But the Resolute was level and maintaining neutral buoyancy on emergency systems, which meant Dakarai had already been working for several minutes before Elena was conscious. The hull was intact. Where are we? Elena asked. I don't know, Mensa said. He was at his station with blood on his temple. From a scalp cut he hadn't bothered to tape yet. Stellar positioning gives me a match for Earth orbit. Same solar system. The spectrum on that sky. There is particulate matter in the upper atmosphere that wasn't there in our last reading. A lot of it. He zoomed the forward camera on the coastline. Those are the ruins of a coastal city. I'm estimating the structures are 40 to 70 years post-collapse, based on the degradation pattern. Post-collapse, Asef repeated. She was pulling data from every functioning sensor. Earlier paralysis replaced by a fierce hunger that Elena recognized. It was the look of a scientist confronting something they had theorized about in sterile academic language and were now standing inside. We moved, Commander. Not just spatially. The temporal variance, I think we came through it. I think we're somewhere else in time. The bridge was very quiet. How far? Elena said. I need more data. The atmospheric composition, the ruined state, the light spectrum. Asef pulled up a calculated projection and stared at it. Estimate, 60 to 80 years forward, somewhere in the range of 2140 to 2160 CE, given our departure point. She looked up. Give or take a decade. Elena absorbed that. She had been trained in crisis response for 15 years, had run simulations for hull breaches, crew illness, hostile intercept, equipment failure. She had not run a simulation for, you have accidentally traveled 80 years into the future. That gap in her training now felt like a significant oversight. She said, here's what we know. We are in one piece. We are positioned close to a coastline. We do not know what is on that coastline or who controls it. We have limited drive capability and partial instrumentation. She looked around the bridge. We're going to find out where we are before we do anything else. Slowly, carefully, without broadcasting our presence. Can you get me 1/3 drive? Give me 20 minutes. 15. It took 11. Dakarai had a broken collarbone and a reputation to maintain. They moved the Resolute toward the coast at minimum speed, running a silent on passive sensors. And within the first kilometer they started picking up signals, random noise, structured transmission, encoded military band frequencies. Someone was using this coastline. Someone was organized enough to maintain communications infrastructure 80 years after whatever had caused the ruins on the horizon. I'm getting multiple transmissions, the comm officer, Ensign Sarah Ling, reported. She was 24 years old and had been on her first deep survey posting for 11 days. She was handling this with the kind of rigid professionalism that Elena suspected was covering a scream, approximately 3 layers deep. Enteded, but the base protocols are. She stopped. They're modified versions of Cathali military band. Someone adapted them. I can work with this. How long? For a clean decrypt? 6 hours. Good enough to know who we're talking to. Maybe 2. Work fast. What Lynch decoded over the next 90 minutes was not, Elena thought later, the worst possible version of the future. It was not good, but it was not the worst. The Cathali had arrived on Earth in 2049, which was roughly consistent with the contact predictions that had been circulating in classified astronomical circles since the mid-21st century. They had not arrived as conquerors. Exactly. The initial contact had been peaceful. There had been negotiations. There had been treaties. Treaties between a species that had been spacefaring for 4,000 years and a species that had been spacefaring for 40 years were not, in practice, treaties between equals. The Cathali had moved into Earth orbit and called it partnership. They had established administrative zones and called them collaborative governance. They had relocated several 100 million people from coastal regions with resources they wanted and called it managed resettlement. The war, the transmissions called it the reclamation, had started in 2089. It was still going. Winning? Okafor asked from the weapons board. Nobody, Lynn said flatly. Cathali hold the major cities and the orbital approaches. The resistance controls most of the interior and some coastal pockets. There are civilian populations in the middle of both. She pulled up a map from a decoded intelligence brief. This coast, we're about 40 kilometers south of what used to be called Lisbon. The ruins we saw are the Cathali administrative hub, destroyed about 12 years ago in a resistance assault. She paused. There's a resistance cell operating in this sector. They have a base maybe 6 kilometers inland. Elena studied the map. What's their posture toward strangers? The message traffic suggests they are extremely cautious about new contacts. The Cathali have been running infiltration operations, synthetic agents, compromised personnel, fake defectors. Lynn hesitated. There's a name in the traffic that keeps coming up. A resistance commander. They call him the Navigator. Why? I'm not sure yet, but there's a lot of traffic about him. He seems to be coordinating operations across multiple sectors. She looked at Elena. Commander, whoever this person is, he's important. Elena thought for a moment. She thought about 42 people, and a damaged ship, and 80 years of elapsed time between herself and the world she knew. She thought about the ruins on the horizon, and the Cathali military band frequencies, and the fact that someone, somewhere on that coastline, was still fighting. Mensa, she said, can we get a drone to the surface? If it's small enough to look like debris, yes. Make it look like debris. The drone came back with footage that changed the shape of the problem. The resistance cell was not what she had expected, which meant she had been carrying assumptions she hadn't examined. She had been picturing a paramilitary organization, structured, uniformed, operating out of something that looked like a base. What the drone showed her was closer to what happened when a community decided it had nothing left to lose. There were maybe 200 people in a network of repurposed buildings and underground tunnels, some of them clearly civilian. Families, elderly people, children. They had weapons, yes, but they also had a medical clinic running on jury-rigged power, a school of some kind, a workshop where people were visibly repairing equipment that had no business still functioning. They were surviving. That was the thing. Against every resource differential and every tactical advantage the Cathali possessed, these people were surviving, which was itself a kind of defiance, so stubborn it read, almost as aggression. The Navigator, when the drone found him, was a man in his late 50s with close-cropped white hair and a left arm that ended below the elbow, a prosthetic attached there. Functional-looking, not pretty. A table covered in maps, and talking to 3 other people with the rapid, elliptical shorthand of someone who had been having the same kind of conversations for decades. He gestured at a point on the map. One of the others shook her head. He said something else. She considered it and nodded. Elena watched him for a long time. Run facial recognition against any databases we have on board, she told Mensa. The result came back 20 minutes later. The Navigator was Dr. Yusuf Karim, born 2064, originally a specialist in xenoatmospheric physics at the University of Barcelona. He had published extensively on Catholicity atmosphere processing technology in the early years of the contact period. He had been considered at one point one of the most prominent advocates for Catholic-human scientific cooperation. That had been before 2089. After the reclamation began, the record had gaps. He had been listed as killed in the early fighting. He had apparently not been. Elena made her decision in the way she always made decisions. Not all at once, but in the slow accumulation of things she couldn't in good conscience ignore. The drone footage, the children in the clinic, the navigator standing over his maps, the ruins on the horizon, the Cathali military band frequencies scanning the coast. "We're going to make contact," she said. She went herself. She always went herself, which was something her XO, Lieutenant Commander Arash Bakhtiari, felt very strongly about, and said so clearly every time she did it. She took him, Okafor, and Asef, and they went ashore in the smallest surface tender the Resolute carried, dressed in civilian clothes, was cobbled from the crew's personal gear, and she left Menza in command with orders to dive deep and run silent if anything on the surface looked wrong. The coastline was quieter than she had expected. That kind of quiet that isn't the absence of sound but the presence of caution. The quiet of a place where the wrong noise at the wrong moment costs sloves. The ruins of the administrative hub were visible to the north. The towers she had seen from the water, up close now more comprehensible and more terrible. Not just collapsed but deliberately targeted, the destruction focused and precise, in a way that spoke to deliberate planning and considerable cost. Someone had paid a lot to bring those towers down. They were challenged twice before they reached the inland perimeter. First by a hidden sensor array that Asef spotted because she had been reading the drone footage carefully, and then by a young man with a rifle who appeared from behind a burnt-out vehicle and said nothing, just looked at them with the particular expression of someone deciding. Elena said, in Spanish, "We are looking for the navigator. We are not Cathali, and we are not agents. We came through the water." She had decided that was the most efficient version of the truth available to her. The young man with the rifle looked at them for a long time. Then he lowered the rifle about 10 degrees. Not all the way, but enough, and said, "Follow me." The navigator's name was Kareem, and he had a habit of looking at people slightly too long. The way a person does when they have been badly surprised enough times that they have learned to read faces the way other people read terrain. He looked at Elena that way when she was brought to him. And she let him, because she understood the logic. "You came through the water," he said, "through the anomaly in the Heron Deep." He was quiet for a moment. "Have been monitoring that for 11 years. Since the second Cathali probe came back with corrupted data. We had a theory." He tilted his head. "What year did you leave from?" 2077. He absorbed that the way a man absorbs something that proves a theory he had wanted to be wrong. "So you have roughly 80 years of missing context. Give or take a decade." He almost smiled. It was a brief, tired thing, the kind of smile that had long since outrun whatever it used to be made of. "I am going to tell you something that will sound like a burden I am giving you, and I want to be clear that it is not my intention." He put his remaining hand flat on the map table. "The anomaly is not random. The Cathalsi have been studying it. They believe it is a navigable pathway, bidirectional. They have been developing a probe to map it precisely so they can send assets backward through time." Elena held very still. "Backward," she said. "To before first contact, before 49. Kareem's voice was absolutely level. "If they succeed, there is no war. There is no reclamation. There is only a Earth that was prepared, that had been adjusted, before we ever understood what was coming." Bakhtiari said quietly, behind her, "Adjusted how? However they chose. We would not have known. We would not have had the context to recognize it." Kareem looked at Elena. "Probe is in the final assembly phase. We have approximately 6 days before they launch it, possibly less." Elena looked at the map on the table, and then she looked at the navigator, and then she looked at her hands for a moment, in the way she always looked at her hands when she was calculating something that did not have a clean answer. "What is it you need?" she said, not a question. She already knew it was not going to be small. "Your ship," Karim said. "Your drive technology. In 2077, the barrier field generators are still fitted with the pre-amendment resonance cores." He met her eyes. We have the targeting solution. We have the personnel. We have been planning this assault for 3 years, and we've never had a way to execute it because the Cathali's orbital coverage prevents any surface approach. At the ceiling, the sky above the ceiling, the Cathali cruisers that she could not see, but that the drone the crew had shown her circling at 40,000 meters. But a vessel coming up from below, one that could move in sync with the anomaly field, could pass through the blind spot in their sensor array. He paused. They are not watching for something that comes from underneath. They have never had to be. Because nothing has come from underneath before, Elena said. Because nothing has come from underneath before. She thought about this for a while. She thought about the 42 people on the rest who had signed up for a mapping survey and gotten something considerably more demanding. She thought about the children in the clinic who had been born into a war they had not chosen. She thought about the young man with the rifle who had lowered it 10 degrees, but not all the way, because that was the specific ratio of caution and hope that 80 years of occupation had calibrated him to. She thought about her father's fishing boat flag going into the squall. I need to talk to my crew, she said. She told them everything. All 42, in the Resolute's main compartment, with the bulkheads around them, and the ocean outside and the future pressing down like depth pressure on the hull. She did not frame it as a request, exactly, but she did not frame it as an order either, because it was not something she was willing to order. What she told them was this: here is what we found, here is what it costs, here is what it means if we don't act, and here is what it means if we do. You are adults. You have the same right to this decision that I do. She expected arguments. She expected the careful, legitimate objection that this was not their war, not their timeline, not their job. She expected the voice of self-preservation, which she respected and had no answer for. She got instead was Okafor, from the back of the compartment saying, "What's the attack vector?" And then everyone talking at once, not about whether, but about how. She stood there and listened and thought about what it was exactly that made a species hard to kill. Not strength, technology, not numbers, something less quantifiable and more stubborn. The absolute refusal to look at a wrong thing and pretend it was none of your business. The deeply human talent for deciding that a problem you did not create was now your problem. Simply because you were present. It was not rational. She knew it was not rational. She loved it anyway. Dakarai, running on 4 hours of sleep and a broken collarbone she had declined to immobilize, spent the next 18 hours rebuilding the Resolute's drive field configuration from the resonance cores up. Teams people provided components they had been stockpiling for 3 years against this exact scenario. Capacitor banks from salvaged Cathali equipment, precision cabling, a field modulator that one of Kareem's engineers had spent 14 months constructing from first principles using stolen technical documentation. Watching them work together, her crew and his, two groups of people who had never met, collaborating across an 80-year divide on something neither of them fully understood. Elena thought about the word partnership and how differently it could mean depending on who was using it. Kareem found her on the stern deck around hour 12. Watching the coastline in the dark. He had brought 2 cups of something that smelled like coffee, but wasn't, and he handed her one without asking if she wanted it. Crew is remarkable, he said. They're people, she said. That's the whole thing, really. He looked at the ruins to the north. The towers were lit from below by Cathali security drones making their sweeps, cold white light that never quite reached warm. I spent 11 years trying to understand what they miscalculated, he said. The Cathali, they are not unintelligent. They had studied us extensively before contact. They knew our history, our wars, our patterns. He sipped the not coffee. What they could not model was this: the way humans will look at someone else's problem and decide, without logic, that it is now their own. He glanced at her. We surveyed several hundred species before we met them. None of the others do this, not like humans do, completely irrational. I know, Elena said. It has cost them considerably. I know that too. They stood there for a while, not saying anything, the security drones sweeping their cold light across the ruins of everything that had been built and lost, and partially rebuilt in the decades between her world and his. My granddaughter, Kareem said eventually. She was born here. She has never known a world without this war. He set down the cup on the rail. I would very much like her to have the option. Elena didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say. She finished the not coffee and went back below to check on Dakarai. The assault went badly in the first 8 minutes and then turned. That was how it usually went, in Elena's experience. The plan held until contact, and then everything became improvisation. And the only question was whether your people were better at improvising than the other sides. The Resolute came up through the thermocline at 0340 local time, running the modified drive field at exactly the resonance frequency Dakarai and Kareem's engineer had calculated. The Cathali sensor array read them as background ocean noise. The mathematical signature of the anomaly's fringe field, which was apparently common enough in this sector that it generated no alert. That part worked. Didn't work was the secondary patrol drone that had been repositioned in the past 6 hours during the attack window, for reasons unrelated to the Resolute. Just a routine adjustment that no one had anticipated, because it was the kind of small, structural bad luck that plans never account for. The drone lit them up at 400 meters. Okafor killed it in approximately 2 seconds, but 2 seconds was long enough for the emission spike to register at the Cathali Tactical Center. Alerts went up. The blind spot began to close. We have a window, Lin called from comm. 80 seconds before their cruiser repositions to cover the gap. Maybe less. Elena looked at the tactical display. Cathali probe facility was in the lower structure, 2 levels below the main orbital platform, mounted on what had originally been a deep space telescope array and been repurposed by the Occupation Administration sometime in the 2090s. Kareem's targeting solution had been built around a 2-minute approach. They had 90 seconds. Dakarai, Elena said into the engineering channel. I heard, Dakarai said. Give me 60% on the aft resonance emitters, and I can cut the approach time to 60 seconds. We will be visible. We're already visible. Then, yes. The Resolute accelerated in a way that a survey vessel had absolutely no business accelerating, and Elena held the con with both hands and watched the tactical display collapse and thought about nothing except the geometry of what had to happen next. The facility came up on the forward cameras, steel and composite, and the blue-black of Cathali construction materials, which had always looked to Elena like something between architecture and biology. The way their structures seemed to grow rather than be built, fading, solution locked. At the weapons board now, Okafor having moved to cover the port sensors following the drone incident. On your mark, Mensa said. Elena looked at the screen for 1 second. She was thinking about Kareem's granddaughter, born into a war, and about the young man with the rifle, lowered 10 degrees, and about the way her crew had stood in the main compartment and asked about attack vectors, when they could have asked about going home. She was also, briefly, thinking about her father and the sea that did not care what year it was, and how maybe that cut both ways. She said. The resonance pulse hit the probe facility at precisely the calculated frequency. It was not an explosion, exactly. It didn't look like the explosions in old war footage. It looked like the facility briefly forgot what it was, and then remembered incorrectly. The assembly bay depressurized. The probe, which had been 48 hours from completion, fragmented along fault lines that the resonance field had introduced into its superstructure at the molecular level. Dakarai had called it, specifically unbuilding something. That was as good a description as any. The Cathali cruiser repositioned 17 seconds later and painted the Resolute with every targeting system it had. Elena had been expecting this. She had also been expecting what happened next, which was that Kareem's ground teams, 6 separate cells coordinating through Ling, who had spent the last hour establishing encrypted relay links, executed their diversionary strikes simultaneously across 4 sectors. And the cruiser faced a tactical calculus that it had not been designed to handle. It was not that the Resolute was too powerful to engage. It was that engaging the Resolute meant not responding to the other 6 problems. And 6 problems in 4 sectors at once was not a manageable load for a single asset with a command structure that required upward authorization for engagement decisions. The Cathali were many things. Bureaucratically inefficient was not a phrase that would have described them, normally. No command structure built for 40 years of managing a pacified population was optimally designed for simultaneous coordinated resistance in 6 locations. They were good at many things. They were not good at this particular kind of chaos. And chaos, Elena thought, was something humans had been practicing for considerably longer. Cruiser withdrew to coordinate. Elena took the Resolute down. 3 days later, anchored in a sea cave that Kareem's people used as a supply cache, she sat with him and 2 of his senior people and went through what had happened and what came next. Probe was gone. The backup facility, which they had not known about before the assault, would take minimum 18 months to bring to operational capacity, even if the Cathali reprioritized every available resource to it. Which they might, but not without exposing other vulnerabilities that the resistance could exploit. Karam was already mapping those vulnerabilities with the intelligence they had gathered during the assault. "This is not over," he said. "No," Elena agreed. "But the shape of it has changed." He was quiet for a moment. "I have been fighting this war for 41 years. I have learned not to think about what winning looks like, because thinking about winning has cost me people who were thinking about winning instead of what was in front of them." He looked at his prosthetic arm the way she had noticed him, looking at it when he was thinking carefully. "I think the shape has changed." Elena thought about the temporal anomaly, still cycling somewhere in the water below them, still available, still a door between now and 80 years ago. "You could come back with us," she said. "Through the anomaly. 2077. Could warn someone. Give them the data, the contact timeline, prepare." Kareem shook his head before she finished. "If you had arrived here and found no war, would that have been better? A species that was never given the chance to fight its own fight, that was simply managed better by a different party." He met her eyes. "I am not sure. I have not been sure for a long time. What I believe is that the choice has to be ours." He paused. "What you have given us is not a rescue. It is a change in the odds. That is what I needed." Elena understood this. She didn't entirely agree with it, but she understood it, which was its own kind of respect. "Then what do you need from us?" she said. "Before we go." He handed her a data drive. On it were 41 years of intelligence, technical data on Cathali systems, structural analyses of the occupation, a detailed breakdown of every vulnerability that 3 generations of human ingenuity and stubbornness had identified in an enemy with every resource advantage. "Take this to 2077, he said. "Don't give it to governments. Give it to the people who will know what to do with it." He looked at her steadily. "People like your crew." She took the drive and put it in her jacket pocket, over her sternum, close to her heartbeat. The passage back through the anomaly was smoother than the passage forward had been, which Asif said was consistent with the bidirectional structure Kareem had described. The anomaly had a preferred direction of flow, and they were with it now, rather than against it. Afina stood at the con and watched the instruments do their impossible things, and thought about how quickly a person can recalculate counts as impossible. 42 crew, 42 people who had come out the other side of something with no designation in the training manual, and every single one of them intact and moving and thinking. She thought about what Karim had said. It is not a rescue. It is a change in the odds. She had turned that over in her mind since he said it, looking at it from different angles, the way you look at a physical object to understand its real shape. She thought it was true, and she thought it was also not the whole truth. What she had seen in Kareem's base, the school, the clinic, the 200 people, surviving with spectacular stubbornness in the ruins of what had been taken from them, was not a species waiting to be rescued. It was a species that would have found a way through regardless, because it had been finding ways through for the entirety of its recorded history, and stubbornness of that magnitude does not stop being stubborn simply because the odds are bad. She and her crew had done was not give them a victory. It was give them a longer runway. Sometimes that was everything. The loop came through the anomaly at 6:14 local time, emerging into the pre-contact Pacific, with all 42 crew and 1 data drive, and the specific, quietly overwhelming feeling of having been somewhere that changed the vocabulary you used for things. Mensa at his station said, Position verified, Heron Deep, standard coordinates. Temporal reading, we are back. A beat of absolute silence on the bridge. Then Okafor, from the weapons board, said, same year, Mensa said. Same month, actually. We were gone about 4 days, adjusted for transit. Another silence. Then Lin started to laugh. Quietly and then less quietly, and Bakhtiari put his head in his hands in a gesture that was equal parts relief and disbelief. And Takarai's voice came up from engineering, saying, is anyone going to tell me we made it, or do I have to keep guessing from down here? Elena stood at the con and let the laughter run its course and felt the weight of the data drive against her chest. She thought about a granddaughter born into a war, growing up in a cave with salvaged power, and a jury-rigged clinic, and a grandfather who had spent 41 years holding a line that shouldn't have held. She put her hand on the command console. Warm metal, familiar under her palm, and felt the ship around her. This stubborn, improbable vessel with its 42 stubborn, improbable people. And thought about what it meant to change the odds. Take us up, Mensa, she said, and get me a comm channel. We have some people to call. She looked at the forward camera, the familiar blue of the pre-contact Pacific, uncomplicated and present and hers. And she thought, there is work to do. She had always been good at work.